you doing at my best friend's house? You were supposed to marry me.
What are you doing here?
Lagos is a city that never really sleeps. But on this particular Saturday evening, inside a small self-contained room in a compound house off Ejibo Road, one woman sat completely still, staring at a phone screen that had just shattered her whole world. Her name was Jess. 3 weeks ago, she had a man, a good man, abroad-based, coming home to finally meet her after 2 years of video calls, voice notes, and promises. Today, that same man was standing in her best friend's living room, holding her best friend's hand, smiling into a camera for an engagement photo. Uju's caption read, "God has finally answered my prayers. Meet my fiancé." Jess dropped the phone. Because Jess knew something nobody else in that compound knew. She knew exactly why her own boyfriend was now engaged to her best friend of 15 years. What Jess did not know, what she could never have imagined, was that the real storm had not even started yet. To understand how two inseparable friends ended up here, we have to go back to a compound house with 6 rooms, a shared bathroom, gossiping neighbors, and two girls who once swore nothing could ever come between them. This is the story of Jess and Uju. This is friendly betrayal. Number 14, Balogun Street was not a fancy house. It was the typical Lagos face me I face you compound. 6 rooms facing each other across a narrow corridor, one shared kitchen space outside, a communal bathroom with a bucket system, and a landlady, Mama Kate, who knew everybody's business before they even knew it themselves. It was in this compound that 9-year-old Jessica, everyone called her Jess, met 6-year-old Ujunwa, whom everyone called Uju. Uju's family had just moved in, fleeing a smaller apartment in Ojo after her father lost his transport business. Jessie's family had been in the compound for 3 years already. The two girls met over a bowl of shared boli and groundnuts that Jessie's mother had made, and from that evening, they were never really apart again. They walked to the same primary school. They shared textbooks when one family could not afford new ones that term. They plaited each other's hair on Sunday evenings before church. When Jessie's father passed when she was 12, it was Uju who slept in her room for 2 weeks straight so she wouldn't be alone with her grief. By the time they were teenagers, the entire compound had a saying, "You cannot call one without the other showing face." They did everything together, fetched water together, hawked pure water together on hot afternoons to support their mothers, cried together over their WAEC results, celebrated together when they both gained admission, Uju into University of Lagos to study business administration, Jess into a polytechnic in Yaba to study mass communication. If you had asked anyone in that compound, in that entire street, who Jessie's best friend was, they would say Uju without blinking. And if you asked who Uju's best friend was, they would say Jess. Nobody could have predicted what would grow quietly between them, like a small crack in a wall that nobody bothers to notice until the day the whole wall comes down. Every friendship survives its first real test of comparison. For Jess and Uju, that test came in their early 20s, and it came so gently that neither of them noticed it was a test at all. Uju finished her degree first. She had started school earlier because Jessie's polytechnic admission had been delayed by a year due to school fees. Within 8 months of her youth service, Uju landed a marketing officer role at a growing fintech company in Victoria Island. The pay was modest by VI standards, but by compound standards, it was a miracle. Uju bought her mother a small gas cooker. She bought herself 2 new outfits. She started using Uber sometimes instead of Danfo. Jess was happy for her friend, genuinely. She helped Uju choose her outfit for the interview. She prayed with her the night before. When the appointment letter came, Jess was the one who screamed the loudest in that corridor, drawing all the neighbors out of their rooms to hear the good news. But that night, alone in her room, something small and uncomfortable settled in Jessie's chest. She sat on her bed, still in her work clothes from the small event planning company where she was doing an unpaid internship, and she thought, why her and not me? We started from the same place. She did not act on the thoughts. She barely even admitted it to herself. She simply noticed it. The way you notice a small stone in your shoe. Annoying, but not enough to stop walking. 2 months later, Uju was given a company laptop and a slight promotion in title. Jessie's internship still had not converted into paid employment. 3 months after that, Uju attended a training program in Abuja, all expenses paid by her company. She came back glowing, full of stories, new contacts, new confidence. Jess listened to every story with a smile on her face and a tightening in her stomach that she still refused to name. The stone in her shoe was growing. It started small. It always starts small. There was an opening at Uju's company for a junior brand associate role, the kind of entry position that could have finally given Jess a proper paying job with structure and growth. Uju, excited, mentioned it to her HR contact and personally forwarded Jess's CV, telling her manager, "She's like my sister, she's very hardworking, please give her a chance." An interview was scheduled for a Thursday morning. On Wednesday night, Jess and Uju sat together in the corridor outside their rooms, as they always did, going over interview questions. Uju coached her friend patiently. How to answer, how to present herself, what to wear. That same Wednesday night, after Uju had gone to sleep, Jess set her own alarm, not for the interview time, but 2 hours later. She told herself it was an accident. She told herself she was just tired. But something in her, something she would not look directly at, had decided that if she did not get this kind of opportunity easily, then maybe she did not truly want it, and maybe it was safer if it simply did not happen at all. She woke up at 10:15 a.m. for a 9 a.m. interview. She called the HR office in a panic, apologizing, blaming NEPA for interrupting her alarm phone charging, blaming traffic she never actually sat in. The recruiter was polite but firm. The position had already been filled internally by another candidate. When Uju heard the news, she was more disappointed than Jess was. "Ah, Jess now, how now? I already told them how good you were," Uju said, holding her friend's hands. "Don't worry, another opportunity will come. Next time I will personally come and wake you myself." Jess nodded, apologized again, and let her friend comfort her over her own quiet sabotage. That night, lying in bed, Jess felt something she hadn't expected to feel: relief. Not because she didn't want the job, but because, in some twisted corner of her mind, if Uju's company had two of them succeeding, the gap between them would have felt smaller, more bearable. Instead, it stayed exactly where it was. Uju rising and Jess comfortably, safely behind. She did not call it sabotage. Not yet. She called it bad luck. What happened with the interview was not a one-time incident. It became a pattern, quiet, deniable, and always dressed up as coincidence. When Uju got connected to a mentor who wanted to help small businesses register with Smedan and offered a similar opportunity to Jess for her small event decoration side hustle, Jess forgot to submit her documents before the deadline, blaming a fictional problem with her printer. When a modeling agency scout noticed Uju at a friend's wedding and asked if she and Jess, who was also present and striking, would like to come in for a look test for an ad campaign, Jess told the scout, privately, that she was not really interested in that kind of work on Uju's behalf, without ever passing the message to Uju at all. Uju never even knew the opportunity had existed. She simply wondered, months later, why that particular scout never followed up on the group photo he'd taken of them both. When Uju wanted to introduce Jess to a woman running a small digital marketing agency who was looking for a social media assistant, Jess showed up to the informal meeting 20 minutes late, distracted, giving short answers, subtly undercutting her own qualifications. "I'm not really that good with the technical stuff. Uju is the smart one, not me." Until the woman quietly moved on and hired someone else entirely. Every single time, Jess found a way to make sure that whatever door opened for her because of Uju's goodwill closed again, by her own hand, hidden so carefully that even she began to believe her own excuses. And every single time, when the disappointment came, Uju was right there, holding her friend's hand, saying things like, "Jess, don't cry. Something better is coming. I believe in you. You are the smartest person I know. They just don't see it yet." Jess would cry real tears, because some part of what she felt was genuine grief. Grief for a version of herself she was quietly murdering, opportunity by opportunity, out of a jealousy she refused to name. Here is the part of this story that made everything so much more painful later, when the truth came out. Despite everything, despite every quiet act of sabotage, Uju never once suspected her friend. Because Jess was also genuinely the person Uju ran to for everything. When Uju's father's health began to decline and the hospital bills started piling up, it was Jess who sat with her in the hospital corridor at 2 a.m., who held the small basin when Uju vomited from stress and lack of sleep, who quietly went round the compound collecting contributions from neighbors without being asked. When Uju's first serious relationship in university ended badly, the boyfriend had been cheating with two other girls on campus. It was Jess who packed her things from the boys' hostel, who sat with her for 3 days as she cried, who told her, "Uju, you are too good for a boy like that. God has someone better." When Uju got her promotion, the first person she called, before her own mother, was Jess. When Uju was sad, scared, confused, broken, or overjoyed, Jess's number was the first one she dialed. And Jess, in her own complicated, damaged way, loved her friend deeply. That was the tragedy underneath everything. Jess was not a cartoon villain, twirling a mustache in the dark. She was a young woman who loved her best friend and envied her in the exact same breath. And she had never once stopped to examine how those two feelings could not both keep living inside her without eventually destroying something. The compound neighbors, watching from their doorways, still believed what they had always believed, that Jess and Uju were a single unit, inseparable, the closest of sisters. Only one person in that compound was beginning to see something else entirely. Mrs. Adebayo, occupant of room 3, was a retired secondary school teacher in her late 50s, sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued, and generally unbothered by other people's business, except when something crossed a line in front of her. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Uju had been trying to raise a small amount of capital, about 80,000 naira, to buy a batch of imported perfume oils she planned to resell, an idea that could have grown into a proper side business alongside her job. She had approached 3 people in the compound to contribute small amounts as an informal loan, promising to repay with a little interest within 2 months. 2 neighbors had already agreed. Mrs. Adebayo herself was considering it, impressed by how organized Uju's small business plan looked, written out in her neat handwriting on a page torn from an exercise book. Then Mrs. Adebayo overheard something she was not meant to hear. She had stepped out to her window to bring in her drying clothes when she heard Jessie's voice, low, in the corridor below, speaking to one of the neighbors who had agreed to contribute, a young man named Emeka. Honestly, Emeka, I love Uju. She's my sister, Jess was saying. But between you and me, this perfume business, I've seen how she manages money before. Just be careful, oh. I'm not saying don't help her. I'm just saying don't put your full savings into it. I've seen her overspend before, Sha. It was such a small thing. Just a seed of doubt, dropped so casually it barely sounded like anything at all. But Mrs. Adebayo, standing at her window, felt something cold settle in her chest because she recognized what she was hearing. She had spent 30 years as a teacher watching children do exactly this kind of thing to each other in her classroom, smiling to a friend's face while quietly clipping their wings behind their back. She said nothing that day, but she began, quietly, to watch. And once you begin to watch carefully, you start to notice a pattern that was always there, hiding in plain sight. Over the following weeks, Mrs. Adebayo noticed things she could not unsee. She noticed that Emeka, after that conversation, quietly told Uju he could no longer contribute, citing family issues, and the perfume business plan shrank to almost nothing, starting Uju off far smaller than she had planned. She noticed that whenever Uju had good news to share with the compound, Jessie's congratulations always arrived a half-second too late, a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. She noticed that whenever Uju mentioned trying something new, a course, a business idea, a new connection, Jess almost always had a reason, gently phrased, why it might not work, why Uju should be careful, why she should not rush. She noticed, most tellingly, that whenever Jess spoke about Uju to other people in the compound, when Uju was not present, there was always a small, almost undetectable undercutting, a compliment wrapped around a quiet criticism. Uju is very smart, but she can be too proud sometimes. Uju is lucky, honestly. She doesn't even work as hard as people think.
None of it on its own was damning.
Each individual comment could be explained away as ordinary friend talk, the kind of small complaints every friend makes about another sometimes. But Mrs. Adebayo had spent 3 decades reading patterns in young people's behavior, and what she was seeing had a shape to it. A consistent, quiet shape of a woman working, patiently and invisibly, against her closest friend's success. She decided she needed to say something. Not yet to Uju. She wasn't certain enough, and she did not want to destroy a 15-year friendship over a suspicion. But she decided to watch for one clear, undeniable moment. And eventually, that moment came. Jessie's downfall, or what should have been her downfall, came from her own carelessness, exactly as it so often does. Uju had been quietly nursing a new opportunity. A small NGO that supported women-led businesses was running a grants competition, giving out 300,000 naira in seed funding to the best pitch. Uju had been preparing for weeks, refining her perfume oil business plan, now slightly more developed, into a proper pitch deck with help from a friend at work. She was one of only 12 finalists, selected out of over 200 applicants, a genuine achievement that had the whole compound proud. The pitch presentation was scheduled for a Friday morning at a business hub in Ikeja. Uju needed to submit her final slides by Thursday night at 11:59 p.m. Jess, that evening, sat with Uju's laptop under the guise of helping her friend format the presentation. Since Jess had slightly more experience with design software from her mass communication background, it was, on the surface, an act of pure friendship. But somewhere in that process, alone with the laptop for 20 minutes, while Uju stepped out to help her mother with something, Jess did something reckless. She logged into the shared submission portal using Uju's details. And instead of simply reviewing the file, she quietly changed the submission's attached business plan documents to an older, weaker, less developed draft. One Uju had already abandoned 2 weeks earlier for being too thin. She told herself in the moment that she was just checking something, that she would fix it back before the deadline. But she did not fix it back. She left the room, went back to her own space, and let the clock run out. What Jess did not know was that Mrs. Adebayo, on her way to fetch water that same evening, had paused by Uju's slightly open door, an old habit from decades of monitoring restless students, and had seen, clearly, through the gap in the doorframe, Jess sitting alone at Uju's laptop, opening a document titled Old Draft Perfume Proposal, and dragging it into the submission folder, replacing a file named Final Perfume Proposal Pitch. She saw it. She did not understand the full weight of it in that moment, but she remembered it. Uju walked into that pitch presentation confident, well-dressed, well-rehearsed. She had practiced her spoken pitch until she could deliver it in her sleep. But when her slides came up on the projector screen, her stomach dropped. It was the wrong deck. The old draft, thin, underdeveloped, missing her financial projections, missing the improved packaging photos, missing nearly everything she had spent 2 weeks perfecting. She tried to recover, speaking from memory, describing the improvements verbally that the judges could not see on the screen in front of them. But the panel, understandably, judged what was presented to them. Uju did not make the final 3. She came home that evening quiet in a way the compound had never seen her before, her eyes swollen from crying in the danfo on the way back. Jess was there for her, of course. Jess held her, made her tea, sat with her long into the night as Uju tried to understand what had gone wrong. "I don't understand," Uju kept saying, staring at her laptop screen, scrolling through the submitted folder. "I know I submitted the final version. I remember sending it. How did the old file end up there?" "Maybe it's this laptop," Jess offered gently. "These things do mix up files sometimes. Technology can be strange like that." Uju, exhausted and heartbroken, eventually accepted this explanation because the alternative, that someone had deliberately done this to her, was simply not something her mind was prepared to consider, especially not with Jess sitting right there beside her, holding her hand through the entire ordeal. She never suspected, not for 1 second. 2 days later, Mrs. Adebayo could no longer stay silent. She had turned the memory over in her mind again and again, and each time it settled into a clearer, more disturbing shape. She was not a woman who enjoyed conflict, but she was a woman who could not, in good conscience, watch a young girl she had known since childhood get quietly sabotaged by her own best friend without saying something. She invited Uju to her room on a quiet Sunday afternoon, sat her down with a cup of tea, and told her, gently but plainly, what she had seen through that half-open door 3 nights before the pitch. Uju's face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, disbelief, and finally, something like anger, though it was not directed where Mrs. Adebayo expected. "Ma," Uju said carefully, "with all due respect, I think there's a misunderstanding. Jess would never do something like that to me. We've been friends since we were children. She was literally crying with me that night, ma. She was as confused as I was." "I know what I saw, my dear," Mrs. Adebayo said quietly. "I am not asking you to fight with your friend. I am only telling you to open your eyes small. That's all." Uju thanked the older woman for her concern, but as she walked back to her room, her mind had already built its own explanation, one far more comfortable than the truth. People are jealous of me and Jesse's friendship. Some people cannot stand to see two women be this close without trying to find something bad to say. It was, after all, an old story in that compound. Other women had tried, in small ways over the years, to come between them, whispering things designed to create distance where there was only love. Uju decided in her heart that this was simply one more instance of the same tired jealousy. She did not confront Jess. She did not even mention it to her, not wanting to embarrass Mrs. Adebayo or create unnecessary tension. She simply filed it away as a misunderstanding born of other people's envy, and life in the compound continued exactly as it had before. Mrs. Adebayo, for her part, said nothing further. She had done what her conscience required. What Uju chose to do with that information was, ultimately, Uju's decision to make. But she kept watching, quietly, from her window. If there was one area of life where the difference between Jess and Uju was most painfully visible, at least to Jess, it was in matters of the heart. Uju had never struggled for male attention. It wasn't only about her looks, though she was undeniably pretty in a warm, approachable way. It was something in how she carried herself, an ease, a genuine interest in people, a laugh that made men want to be near her. From their university days onward, Uju rarely went more than a few months without some earnest young man pursuing her seriously. Jess, by contrast, had spent years single. Not because she was unattractive, she was, but because something in her guardedness, something in the quiet bitterness she carried without fully realizing it, tended to keep people at arm's length, or attracted the wrong kind of man who left as quickly as he came. Every time Uju entered a new relationship, Jessie's reaction, on the surface, was pure joy. She helped Uju pick outfits for dates. She gave advice on what to say and what not to say. She was, by all appearances, the ultimate supportive best friend. But quietly, patiently, she went to work. When Uju dated a young banker named Chidi for 4 months, a relationship that seemed to be heading somewhere serious, it was Jess who, during a moment alone with Chidi at a mutual gathering, mentioned, almost as an afterthought, "Ah, Chidi, you know Uju was still talking to her ex not too long ago, Abi? I'm not trying to cause trouble, oh. I just don't want you to be caught unaware." It was a complete fabrication, but the seed was planted, and within 3 weeks, distrust had grown enough between Chidi and Uju that the relationship quietly fell apart, with Chidi never quite explaining why he'd suddenly become cold. When Uju dated a young civil engineer named Femi, Jess found a way to accidentally show him a months-old photo of Uju looking cozy with a male cousin at a family event, letting Femi draw his own incorrect conclusions, offering only the mildest, most unconvincing defense of her friend when he expressed concern. When a kind, church-going young man named Tobena began seriously courting Uju, with talk of introducing her to his family, Jess spent 2 weeks quietly, carefully feeding small doubts into the ear of Tobena's older sister, whom she had befriended specifically for this purpose, about Uju's wild past that did not exist. The courtship ended within a month. Every time, Uju was left confused, heartbroken, and increasingly convinced that something unseen was working against her. "So Jess," she said one night, tears in her eyes after Tobena stopped calling without explanation, "I'm starting to think somebody somewhere doesn't want me to settle down. My village people are not happy, oh. Every good man that comes near me just disappears like smoke." And Jess, sitting right there, having personally orchestrated the disappearance of that particular good man less than 2 weeks earlier, held her friend and said softly, "Don't talk like that, Uju. Sometimes it's just not meant to be. God is preparing something better for you. Just be patient." It was, perhaps, the cruelest irony of the entire story that Uju, searching desperately for the invisible force sabotaging her love life, blamed spirits and enemies from her village, when the true enemy was sitting beside her, wiping her tears, feeding her comfort with one hand and destruction with the other. After years of being the perpetually single friend, Jess finally met someone. His name was Kelvin. He was Nigerian, originally from Enugu, but had relocated to Canada nearly 6 years earlier, where he now worked as a logistics coordinator for a mid-sized freight company in Toronto. They connected online through a mutual friend's Instagram comment section of all places, and what started as light banter grew over several months into daily calls, voice notes, and long conversations that stretched late into the night. For the first time in years, Jess felt genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. Kelvin was patient, funny, financially stable, and crucially, entirely uninvolved in the compound's social politics. He didn't know Uju. He didn't know any of the neighbors. He knew only the version of Jess that she chose to present to him. Warm, funny, a little guarded but working on it, deeply loyal to her friends and family. She told Uju everything, of course, staying true to the pattern that had defined their entire friendship. Late-night calls became a shared event. Uju often lying beside her on the bed as Jess spoke to Kelvin on speakerphone, the two friends giggling together afterward, dissecting every word he'd said. Finally, finally, God has answered your own prayer too, Uju said one night, genuinely thrilled for her friend. You see now, Jess, good things come to those who wait. I'm so happy for you, my dear. Jess allowed herself for the first time in a long time to simply feel good without the shadow of comparison hanging over her. After 8 months of long-distance dating, Kelvin made an announcement that sent Jess into a full week of excited planning. He was finally coming home to Nigeria for 3 weeks, both to see his aging parents in Enugu and, most importantly, to meet Jess in person for the very first time. Jess told everyone in the compound. She told her mother. She told Mrs. Adebayo, who offered a polite, measured congratulations. She told Uju first, obviously, and Uju threw her arms around her friend and screamed loud enough that 3 neighbors came out to see what the noise was about. This is it, Jess, Uju said, holding her friend's face in her hands. This is your own turn. I've been waiting for this for you. Neither of them could have imagined what that turn would actually bring. Kelvin landed in Lagos on a Thursday evening in early rainy season, spent his first 2 days visiting his elderly parents outside the city, and arrived in Lagos proper the following Monday, staying at a modest serviced apartment in Lekki that he had booked online months earlier. He and Jess had arranged to finally meet on Wednesday evening, a proper first date, dinner at a restaurant Jess had researched for weeks, an outfit she had bought specifically for the occasion hanging carefully in her small wardrobe. But on Tuesday afternoon, Kelvin decided he wanted to bring Jess something more than flowers for their first meeting. He wanted to surprise her with a small gift basket, nice soaps, imported chocolates, a bottle of her favorite perfume that she had mentioned once, months earlier, in an offhand comment during a call. He asked the hotel concierge for directions to a proper supermarket and was pointed toward a large, well-stocked shopping complex not far from his apartment. It was there, standing in the toiletries aisle, comparing 2 bottles of body cream, that Kelvin first saw Uju. She was there running an errand for her mother, dressed simply in jeans and an oversized t-shirt, her hair tied back carelessly, completely unaware that she was about to become the center of a story that would upend 3 lives. What drew Kelvin's attention was not at first her appearance, though she was certainly attractive. It was something he witnessed just before he noticed her fully. An elderly cleaner at the supermarket had accidentally knocked over a small display of canned goods, and while 2 other customers simply walked around the mess, totting in irritation, Uju stopped immediately, knelt down without a second thought, and began helping the visibly embarrassed old woman gather the scattered cans, laughing gently with her, telling her, it's nothing, Mama. Don't worry yourself. These things happen to all of us. Until the old woman's tense shoulders relaxed and she was smiling again. Kelvin found himself watching the whole exchange, quietly struck by something he could not immediately name. A simple, unforced kindness that seemed to come from a genuinely warm place, not performed for anyone's benefit, since Uju clearly had no idea anyone of consequence was watching. When their eyes eventually met by chance near the same aisle, both reaching for the same brand of perfume, the very perfume Jess had mentioned to Kelvin weeks earlier, the same one he was there to buy for her, something passed between them that neither could fully explain in the moment. A simple conversation started over the shared perfume choice, easy and unforced, stretching from 5 minutes into 45. The two of them eventually sitting at the small in-store cafe, still strangers, still not knowing each other's names' full context, laughing over nothing in particular. Kelvin left that supermarket without buying the gift basket for Jess. He had, without even realizing it yet, found the thing he had unknowingly been searching for. He had, however, gotten Uju's number under the guise of a new friend visiting from abroad, and Uju, charmed and equally curious, had given it freely, thinking nothing more of it than a pleasant chance encounter with a friendly Nigerian man from the diaspora. Neither of them in that moment had any idea of the web they had just accidentally stepped into. Jess waited at the restaurant on Wednesday evening in her carefully chosen outfit for 45 minutes before Kelvin's call finally came through, apologetic, citing a sudden family emergency back in Enugu that required him to travel immediately and would keep him occupied for the rest of the week. Jess, disappointed but understanding, rescheduled in her mind, certain their proper first meeting would simply happen a few days later than planned. But the days that followed brought something Jess had never experienced with Kelvin before: distance. His calls, once nightly and long, became short and infrequent. His voice notes, once warm and detailed, became brief, distracted. When she asked when they could reschedule their dinner, his answers grew vague. Soon. Let me sort out this family issue first. Things are just complicated right now. Jess, confused and increasingly anxious, brought her worries to the one person she always brought her worries to. Uju, I don't know what's happening, oh, she said one evening, sitting on Uju's bed, scrolling through her phone for the 10th time that hour. Kelvin has changed small. He's not calling like before. Do you think something happened? Do you think he met someone else there? What Jess did not know, could not have known, was that the person offering her comfort in that exact moment, stroking her back gently and reassuring her that men can just get busy sometimes, don't overthink it, had been the very cause of Kelvin's sudden distance for 4 days already, ever since a supermarket encounter that Uju herself had not yet connected to Jessie's boyfriend at all. Because Kelvin, in their conversations, had simply introduced himself as Kelvin from Toronto, never once mentioning the friend he had originally flown home to meet. Uju had no idea. Kelvin, for his part, was wrestling privately with an increasingly uncomfortable realization that he had developed genuine, powerful feelings for a woman he'd met by pure chance, while technically still supposed to be pursuing a relationship with someone else entirely, someone he had not yet even met in person, and toward whom his feelings, if he was honest with himself, had never burned quite this brightly, even after 8 months of talking. He made a decision that, in hindsight, was cowardly but understandable. Rather than confront the mess directly, he simply began to withdraw slowly from Jess, hoping the distance would create a natural low conflict ending, while he continued, secretly, to meet Uju for coffee, for walks along the beach, for long conversations that deepened by the day. Neither woman yet knew the other was involved. The storm was building quietly, invisibly, exactly the way Jess herself had once built so many quiet storms against her own friend. By the end of Kelvin's second week in Lagos, his contact with Jess had stopped almost entirely. Calls went unanswered. Messages were left unread for days. When Jess finally reached him on a call, his voice was distant, his words careful and rehearsed. Jess, I think I think we should talk when I understand my own feelings better, he said. I don't want to lead you on. Some things have happened since I came to Nigeria, and I need time to think clearly. He did not explain what those things were. Jess, panicking, asked directly if there was someone else. Kelvin, unable to bring himself to fully explain the truth, that the someone else was her own best friend of 15 years, simply said quietly, I need time, Jess. I'm sorry, and ended the call. Jess spent that night in genuine anguish, the kind of pain that comes from watching something you've waited years for slip through your fingers for reasons you cannot understand. She cried in Uju's arms that same night, completely unaware that she was crying into the arms of the very reason her relationship was ending. I don't understand what I did wrong, Jess sobbed. Everything was going so well. What changed? Uju, holding her friend, feeling genuinely torn about her own budding unexplained connection with a man named Kelvin from Toronto, whom she had been quietly seeing for 2 weeks, said only gently, sometimes, Jess, people show you who they really are eventually. Maybe this is for the best, even though it doesn't feel like it now. It was, without either woman realizing it, one of the most devastatingly ironic moments of the entire story. Uju comforting Jess over the loss of a man that Uju herself, in that very same week, was falling deeply in love with. Weeks passed. Kelvin's departure date came and went. He quietly extended his stay in Nigeria by an additional month, telling his parents and employer that personal matters required more time, without ever specifying to anyone exactly what those matters were. Jess, heartbroken, slowly began to move forward, telling herself it simply wasn't meant to be, never once suspecting that the man who had broken her heart was, at that very moment, falling in love with the person she trusted most in the entire world. 6 weeks after that supermarket encounter, Uju called Jess with a voice full of barely contained excitement. The kind of excitement Jess herself had once carried when Kelvin first entered her life. Jess, Jess, I have to tell you something. I've been keeping it quiet because I wanted to be sure first, but I've met someone, a really wonderful someone, and I want you to meet him this weekend. Please, please be free. Jess, still nursing the wounds of her own recent heartbreak, felt a familiar, uncomfortable tightening in her chest. The same old stone in her shoe, resurfacing after weeks of relative peace. But she pushed the feeling down, as she always had, and told her friend, Of course, Uju, I'm so happy for you. Send me the details. That Saturday afternoon, Jess dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that would make her look put together despite the quiet ache still living in her chest, and made her way to Uju's family house, where a modest gathering had been arranged. Uju's mother, two of her aunties, Mrs. Adebayo from the compound, and a handful of close friends, all invited to meet the man who had, in a matter of weeks, become serious enough in Uju's life to warrant a proper introduction. Jess arrived to find Uju glowing, dressed beautifully, practically vibrating with joy. "He's just parking the car," Uju told her, squeezing her hand. "Jess, I really think this is it. I really think he's the one." A few minutes later, the front door opened and a man walked in, dressed sharply, holding a bouquet of flowers for Uju's mother, smiling the easy, confident smile of a man clearly comfortable and happy. It was Kelvin. Jess felt the room tilt. For one full silent second, her entire body went cold, her vision narrowing to a single point: the face of the man she had spent 8 months falling in love with, the man who had, weeks earlier, told her he needed time to think, now standing in her best friend's living room, being introduced by Uju's beaming mother as the young man my daughter has been telling us so much about. Kelvin's own face, upon seeing Jess standing there, went through a similar brief moment of shock, quickly masked by practiced composure, because unlike Uju, Kelvin had known, from the very beginning of his connection with Uju, exactly whose best friend he was falling in love with. He had simply chosen never to tell her. "Jess, are you okay?" Uju asked, noticing her friend's sudden paleness. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I'm fine," Jess managed, her voice barely her own. "Just a little dizzy, it's nothing." She excused herself moments later, claiming a sudden headache, and left before the introduction dinner had even properly begun, leaving behind a confused, worried Uju and a Kelvin whose composed exterior hid a conscience that had just been forced, violently, to confront the full weight of what he had done. Jess did not leave her room for 4 days. She told her mother she had malaria. She told Uju, who called repeatedly and even came knocking, that she needed rest and would explain everything once she felt better. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling for hours, replaying every single moment of her relationship with Kelvin, trying to understand how it had led here, to this exact, impossible cruelty. Because here was the truth Jess could not escape, lying alone in that small room. This was, in some cosmic, unbearable way, a mirror of every single thing she had done to Uju over the years. Every opportunity she had quietly destroyed. Every relationship she had secretly sabotaged. Every quiet lie whispered to protect her own fragile sense of being enough. And now, without any juju, without any village enemy, without any of the invisible forces Uju had once blamed for her misfortunes, the very same universe had delivered Jess an ending that felt, in its own strange way, unbearably, poetically fair. But Jess, in her grief, did not arrive at humility. She arrived, instead, at rage. Because the human mind, when confronted with pain it has secretly earned, rarely leaps first to accountability. It leaps to blame. And Jess's mind, spiraling in that dark room, decided, with the same twisted logic that had justified years of quiet sabotage, that this was not karma, not consequence, but betrayal. That Uju had somehow known. That Uju had taken him deliberately. That her best friend, her sister of 15 years, had stolen the one good thing Jess had ever managed to have. It did not matter that this was untrue. Uju had genuinely never known Kelvin was Jess's boyfriend until that exact moment in the living room. It did not matter, either, that Jess herself had spent years doing precisely what she now accused her friend of. The mind protects itself with whatever story allows it to keep breathing, and Jess, on the 4th day, finally rose from her bed with a story fully formed in her heart. Uju took everything from me, and now she will pay. What followed was the ugliest chapter of Jessie's life, a slow, deliberate campaign to make Uju as miserable as Jess herself now felt. She started small, the way she always had. She began telling mutual friends a carefully edited version of events that Uju had known about Kelvin all along, had snaked her own best friend's man deliberately, betraying 15 years of sisterhood for a chance at a foreign visa and a comfortable life abroad. She left out, of course, every detail of her own history of sabotage, painting herself as nothing but an innocent victim of a scheming friend. She stopped speaking to Uju entirely, ignoring calls, deleting messages unread, and when Uju, devastated and confused, genuinely unaware of any wrongdoing, came to her room in tears, trying to explain that she had never known Kelvin was Jessie's boyfriend until the moment of the introduction, Jess screamed at her through a barely opened door. "Don't ever speak to me again, Uju. I know what you did. Everybody in this compound will know what kind of friend you really are." She began actively working against Uju's happiness for the first time, not out of hidden jealousy, but out of open, declared war. She reached out to Kelvin's family in Enugu, whom she had met briefly months earlier during a video call, and told them a distorted version of events, hoping to poison their opinion of Uju before the relationship could progress toward marriage. She spread rumors within the compound, trying to turn neighbors against Uju, whispering that she was untrustworthy, manipulative, a snake in the grass. Mrs. Adebayo watched all of this unfold with a heavy heart, and finally, she decided that the time for silence, for carefully measured concern, was over. Mrs. Adebayo called Uju to her room again, this time with a seriousness in her voice that Uju had never heard from the older woman before. "My dear," she said, taking both of Uju's hands in hers, "I stayed quiet before because I did not want to be the person who destroyed a friendship on suspicion alone. But I cannot stay quiet any longer. Not while I watch you being destroyed by someone still pretending to be a victim." She told Uju everything. What she had seen through the half-open door the night before Uju's failed grant pitch. The old draft, the final draft, the quiet, deliberate switch. And this time, something in Uju finally allowed the truth to land. Perhaps because the pain of the past few weeks had already cracked open a door in her mind that had been sealed shut by love and loyalty for over a decade. She sat in stunned silence for a long moment, and then, slowly, painfully, other memories began rising to the surface, recontextualizing themselves in front of her. Chidi's sudden coldness, Femi's unexplained suspicion, Tobena's family turning against her overnight, Emeka's abrupt withdrawal from her business plan, years of bad luck that had never, not once, actually been luck at all. Uju left Mrs. Adebayo's room that afternoon, feeling as though the floor of her entire life had shifted beneath her. But there was one more piece of the truth still waiting to surface. A piece that even Mrs. Adebayo did not know. A piece that would turn this entire story on its head. Kelvin, watching from the sidelines as Jessie's smear campaign grew louder and more public, finally decided that silence was no longer an option. He had spent weeks wrestling privately with guilt over how he had handled the entire situation, and Jessie's increasingly aggressive attempts to destroy Uju's reputation forced his hand. He asked to meet Uju privately and told her something he had been holding back since the very night of the introduction. Something he had only pieced together himself over recent weeks, through quiet conversations with mutual acquaintances and a nagging unease that had followed him since that first day in the supermarket. "Uju," he said carefully, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you react. When I first came to Nigeria, I wasn't just coming to meet a woman I'd been talking to for months. I was coming, if I'm honest, already carrying some doubts. Because a mutual friend of ours in Toronto, someone who also knows Jess's cousin, had mentioned to me, almost in passing, some concerning stories about Jess. Stories about how she'd handled friendships and opportunities in the past. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself people gossip, people exaggerate, but it stayed in the back of my mind. He continued, "The day I saw you at that supermarket, helping that old cleaner without anyone asking you to, that wasn't just attraction, Uju. That was everything I'd hoped Jess would be and had started to doubt she was. I know it was wrong of me not to tell you sooner who I really was to Jess. I was a coward about it. But I need you to know, I didn't take anything from you that wasn't already, quietly, falling apart underneath the surface long before I arrived." He told her, finally, about the messages Jess had sent him just days after his silence began. Messages Uju had never known existed. In her panic over his withdrawal, Jess had, in a moment of desperate manipulation, actually reached out to Kelvin's older sister in Toronto, pretending concern, hinting that a girl in the compound was trying to seduce him away from Jess, without ever naming Uju directly, trying to poison the well from both directions at once, protecting her relationship through the exact same tactics she had used against Uju for years. Kelvin had screenshots. His sister had forwarded them to him, confused and concerned, weeks before the introduction had even happened. He showed them to Uju. Armed now with the full, undeniable truth, Mrs. Adebayo's testimony about the pitch sabotage, and Kelvin's screenshots revealing Jess's frantic, manipulative messages sent in a panic before the introduction had even occurred, Uju finally allowed herself to see her best friend clearly for the first time in 15 years. She did not react with the explosive rage Jess had shown. Instead, something quieter and in its own way, far more devastating settled over her: grief. The particular complicated grief of mourning a relationship that had been, in her heart, one of the most important of her entire life, while simultaneously understanding that it had never quite been what she believed it to be. She gathered the evidence, Mrs. Adebayo's account, the screenshots from Kelvin, and after some quiet digging of her own, a conversation with the modeling scout from years earlier, who still remembered when gently asked that a friend of the girl he'd photographed had told him she wasn't interested. A message that Uju had, in fact, never sent. She called a small gathering, not for drama, not for public humiliation, but for clarity, inviting Mrs. Adebayo, her mother, and deliberately Jess herself, under the guise of a final conversation to settle things properly, that Jess, still certain of her own righteous victimhood, agreed to attend, expecting an argument she believed she could win. Instead, she was met with evidence. Uju laid it all out calmly, without shouting, without tears, simply reciting each incident in order. The interview overslept on purpose, the modeling opportunity intercepted and killed, the perfume proposal sabotaged the night before the pitch. Chidi, Femi, Tobena, each explained in quiet, damning detail, and finally, the messages sent to Kelvin's sister in a moment of pure panic, revealing that even in the middle of her own supposed victimhood, Jess had still been actively working to manipulate the outcome in her favor. Jess sat frozen through all of it, her mouth opening and closing several times as if searching for a defense that simply did not exist. In the end, all she managed to say, in a small broken voice, was, I only did those things because I loved you and I was scared of losing you to a better version of everything I wanted. That's the saddest part of all this, Jess, Uju said quietly, standing to leave. You didn't have to lose me to anything. I would have celebrated every single good thing that ever happened to you with my whole heart, exactly the way I always did for you. You destroyed something real, trying to protect yourself from something that was never actually a threat. Word travels fast in a compound house, and within days, the full story had made its way through every room at number 14, Balogu Street, and beyond into the surrounding neighborhood. The reaction was not the kind of loud, dramatic mob justice one might expect from a Nollywood script. It was quieter and in some ways more painful for Jess than shouting would have been. Neighbors who had known her since childhood began greeting her with a careful, cool politeness where warmth used to live. Mama Kate, the landlady, made a point of publicly praising Uju's character during compound meetings while pointedly saying nothing about Jess at all. Old friends stopped inviting her to gatherings, not out of cruelty, but out of a quiet collective discomfort with what she had done. Jessie's own mother, devastated to learn the truth, sat her daughter down and told her something that cut deeper than any of the compound's cold shoulders. I raised you to celebrate other people's joy, not to quietly murder it while smiling in their face. I don't know this person you've become, Jessica. I pray you find your way back to who I raised. Jess, humiliated and increasingly isolated, eventually made the decision to move out of the compound entirely, relocating to a smaller room across town, away from the daily reminders of everything she had lost. Not because Uju demanded it, but because she could no longer bear the weight of everyone's knowing eyes. Here is where this story takes its final, unexpected turn. Because the ending was not simply Uju's triumph and Jessie's downfall, as satisfying as that alone might have felt. 6 months after everything came to light, Uju and Kelvin's relationship deepened into a genuine, healthy partnership, and they eventually married in a modest, joyful ceremony attended by the entire compound. Everyone, that is, except Jess, who was not invited, and who, by that point, had not spoken to Uju in months. But roughly a year after the wedding, something happened that nobody in the compound expected. Uju herself reached out to Jess. Not to rebuild the old friendship. That door, both women understood, could never fully reopen in the same shape it once held. But Uju, now a married woman with a stable job, a growing perfume oil business that had finally taken off with Kelvin's quiet financial support, and a heart that had done its own private work of healing, sent Jess a short message one evening. I heard you've been struggling since you moved. I'm not calling to be your friend again because I don't think I can trust you the way I used to. But I don't want to see you completely alone either. If you ever want to talk, really talk about what happened, I'm willing to listen once, if you're ready to be honest. Jess, who had spent the past year in genuine hard reflection, partly through the humiliation of watching her old life fall away, and partly through quiet conversations with a pastor at a new church she had started attending out of sheer loneliness, finally did something she had never once done throughout this entire story. She told the complete, unfiltered truth. Not the edited victim's version, the real one. Every sabotage, every lie, every quiet cruelty dressed up as friendship. Uju listened, without interrupting, for nearly 2 hours. At the end, she did not offer forgiveness in the easy, sentimental way a lesser story might demand. She simply said, "Thank you for finally being honest. I don't know if we can ever be what we were, but I'm glad the line is over." The two women did not become best friends again. There was no dramatic group hug, No return to matching outfits and shared secrets. What grew between them instead, slowly, over the following 2 years, was something smaller but sturdier. A cautious, respectful acquaintance that occasionally, on quiet days, remembered fondness. Jess eventually built a modest but honest career of her own in event planning, no longer looking sideways at anyone else's success, having learned, at devastating cost, exactly where that road led. And in the end, perhaps that was the truest, most unexpected twist of all. Not a dramatic downfall, not a magical comeuppance delivered by village spirits or hidden enemies, but the much harder, much more human ending. Two women forced to confront the plain, unglamorous truth that real betrayal rarely comes from strangers or witches in the village. It comes, most often, from the people closest to us, wearing the face of love the entire time. They say your worst enemy can wear the face of your best friend, smiling with you, crying with you, celebrating with you in public, while quietly working against you in the dark. Jess was never haunted by village people. There was no juju, no enemy from home, no spiritual attack chasing her happiness away, no matter how many times Uju prayed against invisible forces in the quiet of her room. The only enemy Uju ever had was sitting beside her the entire time, holding her hand through every heartbreak she herself had caused. If there is one lesson this story leaves behind, it is this. Watch closely, not just for those who curse you from a distance, but for those who comfort you a little too conveniently after every disaster that only seems to happen when they are nearby. Guard your dreams, guard your opportunities, and above all, guard your heart, even from the people closest to it. This has been Friendly Betrayal. Thank you for listening.